Absolutely thrilling stuff. Okay. Right. So let's go.
Okay.
Ready?
Yep, I'm ready. 1, 2. Oh no, we already did that countdown.
Amazing.
Yeah, right.
That's a new one.
Hit the intro.
Okay. Okay, welcome everyone to the Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast, episode 82, just confirmed by the Google Doc. 82. So, James, it feels like it's been a while. I don't know. If you're listening, it may not have been as long as it feels to us. How are you on this Hanami weekend?
Doing good. Back, recording back as usual in the rough and gritty streets of Yokohama. And it is great to be home. And we will just leave it at that.
Okay. And if anyone works for Frosties and they're keen to sponsor us, you can see there that we have our very own Tony the Tiger.
I was about to say that reference was going over my head, but I got Tony the Tiger.
You got it finally.
Well, you did mention, yes, a little bit of sakura cherry blossom season here in Japan, and today was the one non-rainy day that you could go out. So myself and maybe about 32 million other people were out in the streets and parks enjoying the view, but it was nice. It was pleasant. It was warm. So it was a good day and ready to hit the jazz tonight.
Cool. Okay. Well, it's the morning for me, and I feel a bit left out that I don't have a drink, particularly as we're about to record an Instagram live in celebration of the 10th anniversary of the project. Yeah, how exciting that we've reached that milestone. But we're going to cover a lot more about that on the Instagram live, which we'll also put out as a podcast episode. So you will be able to hear that if you're not on Instagram or you missed it. But even if you did miss it, it should still be up there on the feed. But either way, there's no escaping it clearly. So we'll kind of move on to the last two places. In true kind of professional Tokyo Jazz Joints podcast style, in the preamble that we didn't record, we both discovered that neither of us have any notes about this place, about two places. So we're going to cover two Tokyo joints today, both of which we have both been to, but separately. So I was able to go to both of these places back in May of 2024, and I have them on my phone on the list of notes that I have, but the first one just has the name of the place, then it just says 2007 and 59. And then for the last place, there's just absolutely nothing other than the title of the place. So, it's a semi-fictional episode, potentially.
Well,
because
I do have some Japanese information in front of me on my screen that is probably more reliable than either of our notes. So
that's a fair point.
We do strive for accuracy, but yeah, it's funny you mentioned that you went there. That's right, on your last trip just a year ago, May 24. I had actually gone to both places 1 year earlier, May 23, and I think another, maybe a second or third visit to one of those joints. But these were the two last after a very long and epic trip that we did. And like you always say, Philip, I had to come home. I had to get back to my day job, so I didn't get to these places with you. But both of them, I think, left a strong impression because, I mean, how many times have we said this? But a lot of people think that the jazz kisa and everything that we do, especially because the focus in the book was so much on the older places, our whole sort of ethos of capturing these old joints before they close. And yet both of these are much more, recent openings and just very, very welcome additions. I think we start in an area that I know that, many people who live in Tokyo or have been here have been to, and it's Asagaya on the Chuo line, a little bit west of Shinjuku. And this was a place that had sort of popped up on my radar because, people often will text me or tag me and, or tag us these days as well. Like, you guys know this, if you've been here, or, the big explosion of popularity. And I happened to see the name, and it was just, really simple. It's just Jazz Cafe Asagaya at Mark, right? And I was like, why have I never heard of this? This is very strange. And then someone else had said, like, no, that's just their online name. The name of the place is Sune. And I was like, that doesn't sound like a jazz bar name. I think for people who've been in Japan, and Philip, you'll know this. If you heard that there was a bar called Sune, you would immediately think that's a snack. It's not a jazz bar.
Yeah.
It's like, like bar, moon or flower, like those kinds of names. But in fact, it is a jazz bar, and there's two things that just jump out immediately. Number one, it's open the most infrequently of any jazz place we've ever been. Do you remember the opening hours?
Yeah, well, you see, I was a bit confused actually because, let me just consult my notes. Oh no. I was a bit confused by this place because I think, so my understanding, so I thought this place was Sune, but when I went it was on a Saturday afternoon. So basically it's only open on a Saturday as a jazz bar, and I took a note. So it's 2 till 7 p.m. every
Correct.
Saturday. But
Correct.
the weird thing was that when I went, so I'm very, very articulate this morning. My understanding is that it was called Asagaya Jazz Bar Tsune, but actually it's no longer a jazz bar in the sense that owner no longer has it. So what they do now is they alternate days, and the jazz day is this lovely, lovely couple who are kind of, I think probably at like retirement age, who take it over on a Saturday, because actually we got there fairly promptly and they were still in and unpacking all their stuff. And this is one of these things where like it kind of blows my mind, because I know for a fact in Ireland this would never ever work, because what was happening was they come in with all their stuff, their coffee making stuff, and also the bottles of alcohol. But the mad thing is that there's a load of alcohol there, but the owner's like, oh no, we can't touch that. That belongs to another owner or to another bar. And I know for a fact that this would just not work here, right? There would just be constant arguments about people taking shots from other bottles. Yeah.
That would not work in Ireland. I don't think that would work almost anywhere, to be honest. Yeah. I think that.
But they had some name, and then they were using some name, I think. And like this, I cannot for the life of me remember but I remember texting you or talking to you about it, because they were kind of insistent that it wasn't actually called Sune. They were calling it something like, Saturday Jazz in Asagaya or something.
Very confusing, Philip. Very confusing. Yeah, and I remember that now. I remember the text you sent me, because I don't think I gave you the full story about it, because so when I went there, I very similarly, like I showed up and I was like, wait a second, I've been on this street a cajillion times. Okay, so it's Star Road in Asagaya, where you come out of the station and you walk to the left on the north exit. It's one of those roads that every urban city in Japan has, Moon Road, Star Road, our favorite Bourbon Road, where Pithecanthropus is. Anytime you have that kind of name, it's a drinking area. Tons of little shops and standing bars and whatever. And I had been there too, because it's also near where the Live Jazz Club Manhattan is. But I didn't remember there being this jazz bar. And then so when I went in that first time and walked in, immediately I was struck, because, okay, it looks like a snack. Without a doubt, it's the smallest place we've ever been. I think it's 6 seats. Maybe you could get in 8 if you really squeezed along like 4 and 4. It's basically just a little L counter shape, right? So I walked in on a Saturday afternoon around 4 o'clock, maybe 4:30, and Philip, I think I might have mentioned it just briefly on one of our episodes from a couple years ago, but I walked in and immediately had one of those Norm in Cheers, the old TV show moments, because I heard somebody shout out, Jameson, and I looked down at the end of the bar was old friend Ida Makoto, and Ida-san is a retired guy who's a big jazz kisa guy, and he and his wife know everyone in the jazz kisa world, and I've met them many times. And his wife does a lot of the artwork for some of the jazz kisa, like Kisa Sakaiki and whatnot. You see some of her paintings,
okay,
and so they're just. And I hadn't seen him because of COVID. And I remember, I was like, oh my God, Ida-san, that's great. And he's like, oh, I'm so glad you finally made it here. I guess he had been following my stuff online and he thought I hadn't made it. And so it was a really, really warm welcome. And so that was like my way in, so I got a little seat. They fit me in. The owner and his wife, again, very, very friendly, really nice. So, but they explained to me, because I said to them, I said, listen, I'm sorry, guys, I just never knew you were here. And then they got into the whole story like, well, no, you see, we're only here from 2 to 7 on Saturdays. And every other night of the week is a different person. And we all share the rent. And I was like, oh, okay. So the previous sort of like every night, regular business that ended years back, and now it's just this collective, and that's why you saw that thing with the bottles. Like everybody's got to bring their own stock every day they come in. So they told me, they're like, oh yeah, like Sunday is like the Enka girl, like it's a young woman who likes Enka, so she wears a kimono and plays that horrible Enka music. Monday night's just a whiskey guy, so a guy that comes with like 7 types of bourbon, so the customers who like bourbon will come there. So it's almost like a theme, you know what I mean? Like that everybody can rent. I thought it was an absolutely ingenious idea.
I think it's brilliant. Like it's entrepreneurship to me, because like that space is there. It could just be gone, turned into, let's face it, either a convenience store or a hair salon, which is the usual replacement for so many shop units. There seems to be an endless appetite for both. But the fact that they've kept it going, but I just can't imagine it ever working, because it works on the basis that people come, clean up their shit, and then go and leave it as they left it. Leave it as they found it, which is as we've seen, famously with Japanese football supporters and World Cups and all sorts. There's
yes.
just a pride and a respect for your environment where people do it. So it works perfectly. But the place itself, for context, it's you go in and there's, I remember very like terrifyingly wobbly stools. So there's basically, I think, 6 stools around a little counter. So when you come in, it's more like a half room, right? You come in immediately into the left, you have to duck under the counter. And this kind of wooden counter, sections off like the left-hand corner of the room. And then there's 6 seats with stools around. On the back wall, there's a set of speakers, some records that were there from the previous iteration as a jazz bar, which I think he doesn't necessarily use. And then there's just a little kind of curtained off toilet to the right, and it has a door as well, but there's a curtain in there. But and it's got that kind of I don't know how to describe it, but we've seen that. It's a bit like Pithecanthropus. It's got that kind of finish on the wall where the plaster is deliberately it leaves marks on the plaster, so you get this kind of textured finish on the walls. And it was just one of those afternoons. Like it was a sunny day outside, and we went in there, and they were lovely, lovely couple. She had made some like really nice cake. He was knocking up the drinks, and you could tell that he was really, like, he was just so into it. Like, he'd brought this kind of curated selection of records. He put on, one at a time. And for the most part, it was only ourselves that were there. So I was there with Julie and a couple of friends. It was the 4 of us. And then there's an old boy came in at one point, sat for a while, and they kept asking about the sumo. So I sort of deduced that because the sumo wasn't on TV, that's why he was there, because they kept saying, "Oh, you're not watching the sumo. You're not watching the sumo." I thought he'd lost interest, one or the other. But like, anyway, he was in there for a while, like really old guy, like really not that mobile, coming in and leaving, perched on this quite wobbly stool, just having a beer in the afternoon, and he was playing some heavy tunes. But it was quite bizarre because he played this Takeo Moriyama album called Flush Up, which was recorded in the Pit Inn in 1977.
Wow, he was playing some jazz. That's awesome.
That's and like really loudly, right? But and I actually bought the album when I got back home and played it at one of the listening events because it just really stuck in my head. It was just such a heavy tune.
Nice.
But what was amazing was then he followed that immediately with Norah Jones. Norah Jones' debut album, which is just one of those. One of those kind of surreal moments where you're like, oh, wow. And then it's like, oh, hang on.
Need a whiskey.
Come away with me.
God. Well, Philip, the day that I was there, what I couldn't believe, I'm crammed in at the bar. The day I was there, it was full. But, because Ida-san knew me and called me in, that was a way in, And then they introduced me to the guy at the all the way in the back corner seat, and they're like, "Oh, this is so and so, and that's his bass behind him." I look behind him, and it's gigantic, acoustic bass. And I'm like, "Oh, you're a player?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm playing tonight." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool, man. Where are you playing tonight?" And he's like, "Well, I'm playing here." I'm like, "You're playing here?"
Oh my God.
Where? But unbelievably, right behind that part of the counter, you got the guy standing there playing bass, and you'll have a guy playing sax, just packed in. And if you, what I also realized was that, because we knew a lot of the same people, and I just wish I had the notes because I just don't remember his name, but like you said, the owner is like not only just a collector and a jazz fan, but he's a big Jazz Kisa guy because I started seeing him pop up when I really, whenever I'm doing the research for like the places we're going to go or need to look up something on Instagram, like whoever has a page, I'll see he's left comments and stuff. And he's been all around. I mean, he's been to some deep places that you and I have gone, like Bunka and Saitama. Not exactly the easiest place to get to, right? Especially if you live in central
Well, actually,
Tokyo.
do you know what? Funny you should say that. That's jogged a memory, not in the notes, which is that they were talking about Intro. So I think he said that they had gone to Intro when they were students, I think. At least he had, or they'd both been there. And then they had made this kind of throwaway comment, like, apparently, like, you can't get into Intro now most days because there's so many tourists, which I thought was kind of wild because Intro, like, we only ever went once together. And there is a photograph of Intro in the book. And obviously, it was that time that we went in a jam session and kind of waited like a good 30 minutes at the bar before we got a drink.
Where he took a solo on the alto sax and then made us a drink. Yeah. But
it didn't strike me as a place, right?
They said that.
Like would be over.
Philip, that's crazy because Intro was my, because I went to Waseda, right, 20 years ago when I was in grad school there, and so that was my regular place. I was in Intro 2-3 nights a week, and there were never any foreigners. Like, but in those days, it's, it wasn't. How would they have even found that a basement place in Takodana-baba, not exactly a tourist hotspot, right?
Well, I can think of one way they found it, but. It just surprised me, But obviously, like you say, he has that pedigree because they had gone there regularly. So kind of interesting. But I mean, just a charming little place and just so Japanese in the way I think that this had been kept going. It was on that Star Road kind of shopping street in Asagaya, and kind of a shame it was so short because I kept thinking, well, you could probably come here even like 10 a.m. and like have the whole day, but they just seemed happy doing the 5 hours. Even 7 is quite an early time to finish, but it was just all so organized and beautifully put together.
Considering all the booths they had there. But I think like at least in the afternoon that I went. Ida-san and the other customers there, I mean, they would have had a good 15 to 20 years on even us, you know what I mean? So early drinkers, put it that way. Early day, afternoon drinkers. And so 7 is probably time to grab a bite and go home. So it seemed that was sort of the customer base. But I mean, if you're, the thing that's so great, Asagaya is a great jazz town anyway. I mean, we've talked about, there's 5 or 6 different jazz spots there, but you could make, just on that street alone, you could have, anything you want to eat, get your coffee or your booze in at Sune, and then move just right across the street to Manhattan for the live gig that night. And again, Philip, Asagaya is not the center of Tokyo. This is a neighborhood, west along the Chuo line. And just look at all the great jazz there. So, unfortunately it's a bit far from where I live, so I don't get up to that part of town very often, but I think it's the kind of day that I would make on a Saturday one day when I'm out. You know what I mean? Like to just hit the Chuo line and just stop by and say hello again, because we do chat sometimes online. And like I said, like a lot of people I know have been there and have mentioned it, since then. So great. I hope you were able to get the photos though, because I mean, it is so cramped in there.
Oh yeah. I always get the photos.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
I always get the photos. Yeah, no, it was actually fine. And I mean, again, it was one of those situations where it's quite welcoming because, you explain what you're doing and they were genuinely quite interested. And like the friend that was with me is an American guy that, I had been my kind of mentor when I first came to Japan, Christian. And his name is Chris. He wasn't a Christian mentor. And And he, he was chatting away to them. He still works for a Japanese company, and they were kind of interested in what he did. And yeah, it was just all very sociable, and there was no kind of pressure or anything like that. And but also it's limited to how much you can really photograph in there because it's just so small. Like there's limited way to get it, to capture it, because it is like one photograph really with a wide angle lens kind of captures the size of the space. I mean, we talk a lot about these little cramped spaces, but this is a really good example. It doesn't feel that way in the sense that front door, the door is open. There's
a window,
quite a big window on one side. Yeah. So it's not like it's not a claustrophobic space, but it's certainly not a space. You're not going to get anyone standing around drinking, and that kind of thing. Like,
but it's definitely
the 6 seats and that's
it's definitely got that snack vibe to it. I mean, being
totally,
cramped.
yeah.
But well, speaking of cramped, it's a perfect segue, Philip, because
Beautiful.
our last
Seamless.
You said we're getting better at this. Our last joint,
Seamless.
the last joint of the 2024 trip, and a place that, funnily enough, I just walked by 2 days ago for reasons we don't need to go into, but it is in one of the most cramped neighborhoods of Tokyo, way on the opposite side from where Tsune is in Asagaya, in the Nezu area of what they call Yanase, which is Yanaka, Nezu, and Sendagi. This is kind of old Tokyo Shitamachi area, you know? And the streets there are very narrow. There's literally no space between the old sort of small Japanese houses. So if you move in there, all the neighbors know all your business. It's that kind of sort of town. Not very far from, I guess, things that might be famous to some of our overseas listeners. Like, it's not far from Ueno, not far from Eigakan. Obviously, a lot of people have been over to places like that here. So, and it's called Rakuji. And it's, I mean, I have a lot of impressions about Rakuji because it's a place that when I walked by it the first time, I thought, oh no, that's not a jazz joint. That's like some French restaurant or something, not knowing what Rakuji
Was it the La that made you think it was a French restaurant?
There we go. Yes, it was the La. And we'll get to why it's named that. We'll get why it's named that later. But anyway, and it's also very new. That even the front is very new. The sign's really new. They sort of redid some of the
it's a slick
building.
looking place, right? Like, it's a really slick. Like, if you took away the jazz thing, it just looks like one of the you get a lot of these kind of, someone has a little bit of land and they build like a really hip
bistro,
slick looking house in the middle of like other houses that are,
in the middle of very
so
old rundown neighborhood, and so I remember going in and sat down and just ordered a beer and as always go like really early to try and beat any crowd. And so almost within about a minute the jazz talk started because he saw me looking at some of the records. And so he initiated the conversation. So boom, we got right into it. And he told me the whole story. He's like, oh, I'm from this area. We go back like 7 generations. Actually, like my family are more like restaurant people. We have like, yakiniku, people like grilled beef and things like that. They've had like a restaurant, but his passion was jazz. And so he opened it in the first floor. Very similar to do you remember our friend, whose name I just can't remember at the moment, but from Root Down in Kanda. And in the neighborhood in Kanda is where like a lot of the old like publishing companies were in Japan. And so his family owned like a printing company in the building. And then he got the building and he made the first floor into Root Down Jazz Cafe. So it's very, very similar to that. It's sort of like this guy was like, well, look, I don't want to be like grilling beef my whole life. I'm going to open a jazz joint. And so he opened this place and he called it Rakuji because it's sort of a pun on a Chinese, it's a little hard to explain if you don't know Chinese characters, but basically the Chinese character for fun and ear, you can pronounce Rakuji. And he was like, but I want to give it a Western name. I don't just want to give it a Chinese character name or a Japanese sounding name. And I was like, okay, I don't understand the logic very well, but that's cool. At least there's a reason behind it. So he's like, okay, I'm just going to write it in the Latin script and call it Rakuji. So basically it means fun for your ears. And it's very apt because do you remember his audio system? And as our listeners know, we are not audio people, but my God, the sound in there was, for such a small little joint, absolutely wonderful. Super.
Yeah, he wasn't.
Speakers.
I don't think he wasn't cranking it too loudly when we were in. We went in quite early as well. Actually, there's a fair few. I did a fair few walk-bys to get there. And I mean, no mention of that neighborhood would we shouldn't really mention that neighborhood without a shout out to the ever mysterious Richard, our good friend.
Yes, of course.
Who moves in mysterious circles in and around the area. And
yes, he does.
Sort of every so often resurfaces. Painter, very talented, intelligent man, and salsa dancer as well. But yeah, he's up there. And of course, Charmant as well, R.I.P. Charmant, in that neighborhood. And actually, I went looking that day for Charmant and was able to eventually locate where I had the memory of walking to it with you the night that we went. And I could I had this idea of these steps in my head. So there's a shopping street that kind of goes up a little bit of a hill. And I was like, I definitely remember these steps. And I went into like a butcher's or something a few doors down, and eventually was able to kind of make myself understood and what I was looking for. And they were like, oh yeah, that was that building. So I kind of photographed the absence of Charmont that day. But it surprised me because, again, that neighborhood would have been like probably 10, 15 years ago, it would have been super hip in that if you lived there, it was like a real kind of like secret place to live as a non-Japanese. Like it was a real kind of, it became, a lot of artists moved out there because it was cheaper and so on and so forth. But I was shocked by just the amount of tourists now, and English signs and English menus. So it's obviously become, because it does retain a little bit of the flavor of like an older Tokyo, right? Like it's not Shibuya, 100%. It's not Omotesando,
Two things. It's funny because it is very, very close to Tokyo Geino Daigaku, which is the main Tokyo Arts University. So there are a lot of art students there. And I remember the owner told me that, like, you get a lot of the young art college students who are into jazz will come by there for coffee time, or just to hang out. And because they also like the aesthetics of the old streets there. The reason I was there just a couple days ago was because, like we're saying, I just got back to Japan, and very coincidentally, some of my dear friends from Los Angeles actually had their long-planned Japan trip. So shout out to Damon and Molly and kids. So I met them, even though I just seen them a week earlier in LA, and I was like, oh, great. Okay, now I get to show you around, sort of my world here. And I took them on a walk through Nezu because my memory of it was that it's not, again, like you said, like it's not a place that people necessarily would know right away. And I couldn't believe it standing outside Nezu Station. I mean, half the people coming out were foreign tourists. It was unbelievable. It continues to blow my mind how many people are coming to Japan every single year. But I'm actually, I am kind of happy as well, because it's like, okay, everybody wants to go to Shibuya or wherever, and do the main sites. But taking a walk on these side streets of Nezu, and seeing like these kind of old, really, really old shops that do go back a couple hundred years to the Edo period. And then right next to it will be like a brand new like espresso shop, like that they redid like the first floor of an old wooden building, and the two are side by side, perfectly side by side. And I don't think it's a case of like, Philip, you and I have talked a lot about this offline, but places like, whether it's Belfast or New York, where I'm from, like, old shops get priced out. That doesn't necessarily happen in Tokyo. You will find a brand new quote unquote hip shop or restaurant or wine bar or whatever right next to like a shoe store that's been there for like 150 years.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no, that guy's not leaving. Like that guy's got his shop until he wants to close it. He will not be kicked out. And so I think that's what makes the streets of Tokyo unique and so actually really cool to you can wander around and you can pop into Lakuji for the jazz. He even cooks up a bit of food if you want it. But then you can wander down the streets to some really old drinking dens as well. So it's just a great neighborhood and a great spot. And I for our audio friends as well, I'm looking up, it says here that his speaker system is Altec JBL Linear Technology. I don't know what that means, Altec JBL Linear Technology, but it sounded great to me. And he's got
Don't embarrass yourself.
He's got two separate preamps and two separate turntables that he told me, depending on the kind of jazz he plays, he chooses which turntable it is.
Yeah.
And we've heard that. We've heard that before. I don't know the technical reasons, but obviously he's very serious about the sound. But yeah, a really, really nice guy, a great spot. And I was kind of feeling bad that we hadn't been there earlier because, like you said, it has been open for a while.
Yeah, I only had, I was there for about, we were there for about an hour, I think. The things I remember, he has there's one little window in the front, facing onto the street, and he has a signed copy of a Sadawa Tanabe album that's kind of proudly put there, and some nice furniture. He's got a nice bar, nice leather seats, a couple of sofas. There's quite a lot of clutter at the back, so you can't really kind of access the back, and there's bits and pieces in front of the speakers and so on and so forth. But lovely friendly guy. I mean, I don't know what I was doing, but my notes just say 2007, which I presume is when he opened, and then 59, which I think is his age. But which I was surprised by, actually. So like I thought, well, this is amazing. He has this place, and he hasn't even turned 60. So there's a good chance it'll be going for a while. But beautiful, beautiful space. And actually,
I mean, looking
the other
at the
thing that
the Japanese, it says that it's basically like he's the fifth generation of his family in that area, and that he, as a college student, his regular joint was Miles in Meidai-mai, again, another mysterious tiny joint, one of our favorites though. The tiny Miles. So that was sort of like he was like a Jordan there, and had always like dreamed of opening his own place, but it ended up going into the family business or whatever. So he went to cooking school, which is interesting. But it's funny too though, because I think that like he kind of told me like he knows everybody in the area, because again, a lot of these old neighborhoods, probably in any major city, the really old neighborhoods, they're very, from my point of view, like they're charming, they're quaint, they've got the history, but they're also very insular. They can be a little bit hostile towards outsiders coming in. I don't even mean foreigners, even other Japanese. And he was aware of that. And he told me, he's like, he wants it to be more open because he thinks that Japan, even in Tokyo, is too closed. I thought that was an interesting perspective. And yet 2 weeks in a row, another guy offering up comments that you don't always get from Japanese shop owners, pretty honest and pretty sort of deep impressions about Japanese society. So I thought that really stuck with me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, that actually, as you said, I think we maybe finished off in Downbeat on that trip on this Sunday. I left on the Monday. I flew out on the Monday. But that was kind of the end of a fairly intense, maybe not as intense as the earlier one last year, but a fairly intense trip. And you
changed my life.
Way to finish up.
You changed my life forever at that Downbeat session, Philip. Do you remember why?
Oh, I thought we weren't going to talk about
that. No, it wasn't. It wasn't the lovely photograph print you gave me for my birthday. It was not that. It was because you hipped me to basically the best whiskey that I've ever drank.
Oh, of course, the life-changing whiskey.
Yes, a bottle of Writer's Tears.
Maybe this is the point where we finally get a sponsor.
Oh my goodness, I feel bad.
Maybe they'll backdate the sponsorship for 82 episodes.
I don't mean to betray Bushmills or Orion or Guinness, but man, Writer's Tears was so good I had to buy a bottle when I was in the U.S. So probably going to look for one too. Well, maybe you'll sneak one in on your next trip over. We'll see how that happens.
Let's see how we get on. Well, I'm very delighted. Of course, Writer's Tears. Does that mean did I carry that bottle up? No, someone must have kept it.
No, you put your stuff in your friend's house. Right? Yeah. Because the print on that you brought the last. It's not like we were traipsing around Osaka with.
No, that's true. Yeah, I think,
mutual presents to give to each other the last day.
I don't love you that much. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, that's kind of us wrapped up for that May trip. What we're planning to do, hopefully, is as we said previously, and as you will definitely know by now, because this will go out after the Instagram Live, but we're going to try and put together in celebration of the 10th anniversary of 2015 to 2025 of the project. We're going to try and do a top 10 episodes where James and I'll pick one of our favorite all-time places so far. Whether or not we include May or not, I don't know. We probably won't have time to do that. So just watch this space, and there may be some of you that will be joining us on some of those episodes.
Oh, Christ.
All of which will make sense.
I actually had in the notes that we were doing that tonight.
Do what tonight?
We were going to start talking top 10 ones tonight on the Instagram Live. Yeah. No? You sure?
Okay, well, it's
I'm sure you mentioned that. Okay. Now, edit that out then.
No. That was never mentioned. Right, we need to talk offline. Okay.
Yeah, clearly. Okay.
Do not open that fourth beer. Okay, right. Anyway, that was episode 82. What an absolute belter of an episode.
As always.
If you're not hooked already, this will hook you now. Surely this will be the one that hooks you. But thank you as always. We genuinely mean it. Thanks for your support and ongoing encouragement. It's still absolutely baffling to both of us that you tune in on a Sunday, that you listen to it. Many of you almost as soon as it's launched, you're listening there, and we're rapidly approaching 200,000 listens or downloads, which, you know, is just quite frankly bananas. But anyway, thank you, James, for this week. We will chat again very shortly, and we'll have some stiff words once we stop recording.
You bet, buddy. Take it easy.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.